Um, well, thanks everyone for joining. Good morning for those in morning hours and good evening for those on that side of the world. I don't think at this time we'll have anyone for whom it's afternoon. Maybe Stu. Good afternoon if it's anyone's afternoon. Um, I'm Ben. I think we all know each other, but just in case, I'm Ben. I work on the Hub's applied science team, and I do social science work with our Fish Forever program. And today's session is focused on social survey design, social science survey design, really. Um, and so we're going to spend the next, 45 minutes to an hour uh, talking about some principles of survey design. And we're going to start that by actually giving you a survey. We're just going to ask everyone to answer this while we talk over the next few slides, um, just so that at the end of the day, we have a sense of who's joining these calls and who's finding them useful. It's anonymous for what it's worth. So first, we're going to talk through how surveys work and when to use them. We're then going to talk about what types of questions we can use in a survey. And then we'll talk through some common problems and mistakes that people make in survey design. And at the end, I'll just share a few little tricks that I've learned additionally that just really help in the survey design process. We're not going to talk through everything about surveys. So we're not going to talk through survey analysis or calculating results. And we're not going to talk through sample sizes and those kinds of decisions, but really just how to design the questions that go into a survey. And at the end, our goal is this. We want you to be able to walk away feeling like you can assess surveys, whether you make them or someone else makes them, and that you can take a look at it and say, oh, actually, I see a problem there. I know that this is an error that gets made, and I know how to fix it. And then when you design your own, you can avoid those kinds of mistakes. So that's really our goal. So we'll start here. What's a survey good for? Needles, haystacks, and the endless search for meaning. And I'll explain what I mean by that. But first, let's talk about our goals with a survey. Because of course, a survey is a tool to collect data, but what we really want is insight. And I like stealing my colleague Michelle's definition of insight, which is the use of information to reveal something meaningful and true. I love that definition. I cannot take credit for it, but it's a great one. And that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to use information to understand something true and important. Data is one kind of information, right? Scientific data. Um, but it's not the same as insight. And we need to keep that in mind. Just because we have data doesn't mean we have insight. The way I'd put it is this way. If I have a canvas in front of me and some paints and paintbrushes, those are great tools to make art. But that doesn't mean that I'm necessarily going to be able to make art out of them. In order to actually make good art, I'd have to have skills, experiences, creativity, um, and an idea of what I wanted to do. And that's what you need to turn data into insight. And in fact, Danny, who does a little bit of everything on our team, has created an awesome resource for just tracking your moments of insight. It's an insight journal, and we can share that. But it's an excellent little one sheet tool that you can just use when you're in the field, when you're at your desk, when you're looking through data, any aspect of your work, to just take notes of that moment where a piece of information takes a leap into something meaningful and true. So that's a great tool, but keep in mind, when we're trying to create a survey, we're not trying to create insight. We're just trying to get good data. And then we want to use that data and combine it with experience and knowledge and creativity to generate insight in our teams and with participants uh, of our programs. Now, that said, surveys are a really helpful tool for getting good data if you do them the right way. And there are lots of kinds of surveys. There are household socioeconomic surveys. That's, of course, what we're most used to in Fish Forever. But there's also user experience surveys. And you can find those in any sort of tool that people use. You find them in apps, you find them on websites, you find them in airport bathrooms sometimes. Those are also social science surveys. You can make evaluations and assessments of a training, a workshop, or some other kind of activity. And of course, also famously, you can create political polls uh, when elections are around or related to certain topics of political interest. These are all types of social science surveys. And surveys can do a lot of things really well. First and foremost, surveys collect socioeconomic data at scale, and they do so in an efficient way. They may not feel efficient because they can be long and boring, and it's a lot of data and it's a lot of time and effort. But the amount of data they collect is across so many people. And compared to any other data collection method, it is such an efficient resource, like low resource tool. So they're very useful in that way. And that's why they're so common. That broad reach of a survey where you can, you know, survey hundreds or thousands of people, that allows us to identify broad trends and commonalities across a population, which again is very hard to do in a resource efficient way. One of the ways they help with identifying those trends is by translating really complicated things into numbers. So in a survey, you can ask about perceptions, values, beliefs, knowledge, opinions, all sorts of things like that, daily activities. These are really complicated to explain, but you can easily put them into numbers by saying something like 80% of respondents said this. And that speaks quickly, it speaks powerfully in a way that people can generally understand. That makes it useful for reporting and makes it useful also for measuring change over time. And those numbers allow us to find relationships between results in a more direct way. So we can look for correlations, we can look for drivers, we can uh, divide respondents demographically to see how different groups respond. And all of these are fairly simple statistical um, measures that we can do once that complicated data is turned into numbers. And in the end, that allows surveys to be an excellent tool for asking questions about what is going on, how much of something exists, or how many. And you'll see I have a little star at the bottom here because surveys can only do that when they're well designed. A poorly designed survey isn't going to do any of this, but a well designed survey can do all of it. And that makes it an incredible tool for data collection. But surveys can't do everything. So one thing surveys can't do well is they cannot tell you if you're asking the right questions. If you ask a question that is not well designed to tell you what you want to know, you're going to get the answer to that question, but it's not going to tell you what you ultimately want to know. So as an example, if I want to know about people fishing and I ask them about farming, I'm not going to learn anything about fishing. And that's an obvious answer or an obvious example. But this can happen in a lot of ways where we kind of miss the right question. And a survey in itself is not going to tell you whether you're missing in that way. They also cannot tell you if respondents understand the question the way you intend to ask it. So I'll give an example here. If, let's say you ask me, where do you come from? I might answer Kenya because I live in Kenya. And you would look at me and say, you don't look like you're from Kenya and you don't sound like you're from Kenya. Are you sure you come from Kenya? You were born there? And I'd say, well, no, I wasn't born there. I was born and grew up in the United States. Right. So I heard when you said, where do you come from? You meant, where was I born or where was I raised? And I heard, where do you live? And in talking that out, we can realize that mistake was made. But in a survey, we cannot. In a survey, you would ask, where do you come from? And I'd put Kenya, and the data would say that a Kenyan person answers this way. And that would be false because you intended to ask, where were you born or where were you raised? So a survey can't tell you if that misunderstanding is going on. And finally, a survey can't usually answer the question why. It can't tell you why you're getting the results you're getting. We can use some statistical models and statistical tests to identify drivers. But ultimately, a survey is really good for answering what is going on or what people think or what people do, but not necessarily the details of why. And the way I like to put this gets to the title I gave in this section, the needle in the haystack and the endless search for meaning. I think of surveys as data collection in general, as this saying we have in English, which is trying to find a needle in a haystack. So if you imagine a small sewing needle and that's buried somewhere in a huge pile of hay or straw or dried grass, it's really hard to find, and it's not usually even worth looking for. Well, a survey isn't going to help you find the needle in a haystack because, in fact, there may be more than one haystack. And actually, there may be a whole lot of haystacks. And a good survey shouldn't be designed to help you find the needle in the haystack. It should be designed to show you which haystack to look in. It should point you in a direction. And then you can do some follow-up research, use local knowledge, use other methods to find that really detailed, specific answer that you're looking for. And that's usually the why of the question. But if you design a survey to look for that why or to find the needle in the haystack, you're probably not going to get very far. That's my opinion. This is all subject to disagreement, but in my experience, in my opinion, this is sort of how surveys are best used. Now, there are two concepts that really help me think about designing a survey. The first is precision. And precision means how consistently you get similar answers amongst a bunch of different respondents. But being precise isn't enough because you also need accuracy. And that's how close those answers are to the truth. So the Olympics are coming up. Imagine you're like one of those archers, those like bow and arrow shooters at the Olympics. And we've got our targets here. We can see what happens if we have low precision and low accuracy. It looks like this. All the arrows all over the place, and none of them are on target. And we do not want that for our survey. It gets a little bit better if you have high precision, but that can still be a problem. Because if you have high precision, all your arrows are in the same place, but that's still off target if you don't have accuracy. And so what we want is to combine precision and accuracy. And ultimately, our goal is what's happening in the top right, where all the arrows are being shot at the same place, and that place is the bullseye. This is extra important in a survey because in a survey, we have no idea where the targets are. So it looks a lot more like this when you get your data. And if you have a survey that's not precise or not accurate or both, you're just not going to know what it's telling you. Look at how hard it would be to know the difference between the top left and the top right. All those arrows are in the same place, but we don't know which one of those contains the target. So that's how I think about precision and accuracy in surveys. We can go back to the needle in the haystack and talk about this too. If my survey is not precise, I get this. All the answers are pointing to different haystacks, and none of them are the right one. If I'm precise but not accurate, everyone's pointing me to the wrong haystack. What we want is this. Everyone's pointing in the same direction, and that direction is the correct haystack. To be accurate, respondents need to understand that question the same way you do, right? Like that question about where do you come from? They need to understand that the same way you do. And you have to ask a question that successfully leads to what you're trying to learn. And what all that means is that a survey needs to ask the right question in the right way. To do that, there's a process that will help. The first step of that process is identifying your domain or the broad question you want to answer. Maybe it's about well-being. You want to know how conservation affects well-being in a community. That's great. That's a big, broad domain that can point us towards the questions we want to ask in our survey. But you need to go a step further because well-being, well, what does that mean? You need to identify the definitions and the components of well-being because that's what you're going to ask about. Then you design your questions and you don't start from scratch. You use existing research, other surveys about the same topic, can maybe if they exist, other surveys in the same area. You can do focus groups as well to inform your drafting of questions. Then you want to test those questions. You can do that through test surveys or through focus groups, but that's where you can really test whether people are understanding your questions the way you want them to and whether they're answering with the same ideas in mind. That's how you figure out if your questions are precise and accurate. Then you run your survey, you collect your data and you analyze it. And then you do your follow-up research, ideally. Because remember, the survey is going to point you in a direction. Those results are going to tell you where to look next. But they're not going to give you everything you want to know. They're not going to give you the why questions. And there are other methods that can help with that. But having a survey first allows you to use those other methods more powerfully. It's also possible to use a follow-up survey in some cases that's just more targeted based on the results of your first survey. Okay, so what are we actually going to ask people? What types of questions can we ask? I'm going to give you not all the possibilities, but some of the common ones. The first is select one, often called a multiple choice question. This is your standard multiple choice. People are given a list of options and they choose one. And these are great for categorical options. They can be categories of things, categories of people. It can be true or false, agree or disagree. Those are also a version of multiple choice options. Um, and they can be really, really useful. Uh, they're simple, they're clear results. But I'm going to show you some examples here that don't work very well. So Dunny, can you put up survey? Uh, yeah, that's right. So these are some bad options, and I'd like you to actually answer these. And you can probably already see the problem here. With the first one, well, what if you don't have red, blonde, or brown hair? You're kind of in trouble here. You got to pick a choice. right? What if you have black hair? What if you have gray hair? So one of the big mistakes we can make here is not including all relevant choices. And then we force people to answer in a way that's just not true, and our answers are no longer accurate. So that can be a big problem. If you go down to the third example, there's a lot of problems here. One, I don't like the question, how often do you get a haircut? Because what's the time frame? How often in the last month? How often in the last year? How often in my entire life? That answer can change. So it's good to be specific in things like that. And then if you look at my options, they're a mess. I mean, some are in terms of month, some are in terms of week. That can be very confusing. Um, one of them just says a few times. What does that even mean? A few times ever? A few times a year? And some of my answers overlap, right? So once per week and two or more times per month are the same thing. So how are people going to answer? They're going to choose between the two. So these are really bad mistakes because they've really compromised the quality of our data by forcing people into confused answers that will sacrifice precision and accuracy. Of course, I can end up with something like this if I show the results, thinking that almost everyone in this call has brown hair. And that's probably not true, but people had to answer something, so they answered brown. A better example would be the next example that Danny will put up, which gives more options, right? It has options for different colors, it has options for people who don't have hair, and it has an other option for anyone who doesn't fit into these categories. And then in the second question, you can see that the answers have changed to being more streamlined. It's all in terms of months, and it's much clearer to answer. And this puts our respondents in a much better position to answer a multiple choice question. None of the options overlap, and there isn't confusing change in terminologies. I'm going to end this poll and move on in the name of time, but thank you for being game to answer those. We'll have more examples like that going forward. So that's multiple choice questions. We also have select all that apply or select many. It's like multiple choice, but you can choose as many as you want, or you can choose three or something like that. And it's great for getting a wider or inclusive context when many answers may be relevant for people. We can put up my example here, and it'll show some of the biggest pitfalls with this kind of question. So you can see that one of the problems here is you can end up with a really long list that's sort of a burden for participants to look through. This list is bad in multiple ways. It's way too long, and also there's no real rhyme or reason as to including some or not including others. And that's because I got so specific with my choices that I couldn't include every brand of shampoo and conditioner. So I had to just give up and just include these. But that creates a really difficult data situation. The second option is much better. Which kinds of hair care product do you currently use? And I've just chosen broader categories, right? I don't need to know every single detail of what brand you use, but I'm just learning what kinds of products you use. So broadening your answers can be a way uh, of getting a better data set to work with for this kind of question. It's still valid, it's still accurate and precise, but it's going to be higher quality data because it's not such a long list that arbitrarily includes some things and not others. And I've included the option of other to make sure people have that possibility if it applies to them. Okay, next kind of question. Likert scales. I love Likert scales. This is often like a scale of 1 to 5, can be 1 to 10, 1 to 3, where you have one extreme on one end and one extreme on the other. So, for example, on a scale of 1 to 5, how strongly do you agree or disagree with a question? And these are great for assessing perception levels, but they're not good for everything. So you got to be careful. One, you got to define the scale. So in this example, I have not really defined the scale. I've just I've defined parts of it. Very short is 1 and very long is 5. But what's in the middle? What is a 3 here? A person might put 3 for medium, but they also might put 3 for neutral. I don't really know because I haven't defined it. Your 2 might be different than my 2. So I like the second example better, or I'm sorry, I haven't shown you the second example yet, but I will show you. Um, so so the other issue with this is I don't like the question for a Likert scale because a Likert scale isn't very good at complex questions or objective facts. And ultimately, we're asking here about an objective fact. How long is your hair? A better question would be, is your hair shoulder length or longer? That's a fact, and you could do yes, no. But if you say your hair is short, I don't know what that means. The same two people could have the same length hair, but one thinks of it as short and the other thinks of it as long, right? So I think the answers here are correct. The scale definition is ambiguous. And also, the question is ultimately about a fact of how long is your hair. And that's not a good use of a Likert scale. So let me show you an example I like better. I like this example a lot better. How would you describe shoulder length hair on a man? And then I define the scale. 1 is shortest, 5 is longest, just to make sure it's clear. And then I just define every step of the scale. Here, I'm really asking about a perception. I'm giving someone an image of a person and asking them to describe that person. And that, I think, is much more useful for a Likert scale question. Ranking and ordering. We've got 2 more types of questions here, and then we'll take a stop for questions or comments. So ranking and ordering, I love these. This is where you give people a list of options and ask them to put them in a rank, and it's great for comparing types of the same thing. It's excellent for that. And we can look at an example now. Of course, I've given you, again, a bad example. And why is it a bad example? Well, I think it's a not very clear question and it's not very simple. So ranking is already a kind of complicated um, like activity in a survey. So when we do it, the question needs to be really concise and simple. How often you see men wearing each of the following haircuts when you're in public? It's like you've already lost me. So we want to keep these really clear and simple. And we want to define the ranking system. We can't just assume that they're going to put 1 as the most common, right? So we need to tell them 1 means most frequent, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's why I like the second question better, because the second question, it defines the ranking system and it's a much simpler type of question. Just rank the largest influences. Okay, I can get that. It's easier to answer. The other thing you need to be careful for in ranking is how you're going to use the data. Are you actually going to rank or use the ranks, or do you just want to know the top choice? Because if you just want to know the top choice, let's not go through the song and dance of ranking everything. Let's just ask people for their top choice. If you're only going to use the top 3, we don't need to ask about the top 5. Let's make this as easy and as simple and as useful as possible. So use a ranking when you know that's what you want. Finally, we have open answers. Open answers are great for numbers, right? How how many of something, how much do you earn? How many kilograms of fish do you catch? How many times a week do you go fishing? Numbers are great for open answers. Short and consistent verbal responses also can be good. Or if you have a small sample size. So like if I'm sending a survey to my team of 10 people, I'll put all sorts of open input because I know I'm going to read through all of what they wrote because there's only 10 of them. But if I'm interviewing or surveying 400 people and I have open answer questions, I may not actually have capacity to read through and analyze all those answers. So we need to think about that. And we can see examples here of what works and what doesn't. Um, if we can analyze the results, I'm all for it. But if not, it's maybe not the right kind of question for what we want to know. We all want to ask what people's opinions are and give them the chance to respond. But if we're never going to sit down and look at it and really analyze it systematically, it's kind of just lip service, and we're better off using that time to ask different questions. Okay, I'm going to take a quick pause for questions. We've got only about 20 minutes left, so I don't want to take too long. But if any questions have come up, please let me know.
No questions, Ben. Just
Okay.
Angels is mentioning that's a very good point, Ben. Avoiding using Likert scale for questions about objectively verifiable information.
Yeah. A lot of this is just about figuring out the right question in the right situation. Is my question, does it point me towards a multiple choice? Does it point me towards select many? Does it point me towards ranking or a Likert scale? So understanding how those questions are used is really important. And the other thing is making sure our question is written well, um, and avoiding the common error. So there are a lot of common mistakes people make. And in fact, you will walk away from this session recognizing that some of these mistakes exist in our own household survey, and we are correcting them in process. But you'll be able to recognize them, and that will be a very good thing. So the first kind of error is a set of errors that I call language errors. This is a mistake in how we phrase the question. The most obvious one to me is leading questions. This is what happens in political polls usually. They intentionally ask a leading question to make it sound like everyone agrees with them. And then they report to the world that everyone agrees with them. This is why people hate political polls. It's a very good way to manipulate data and make an argument. It's not valid data, and it's not a good way to actually have insight and know the truth. But it's not always done on purpose, and we can unwittingly lead people into an answer by the way we frame the questions or by the types of responses we offer them. So we just need to be careful about the values stated in our questions or assumed in our questions. The second is technical terms. We come across this a lot in our work because we do technical work. In this example, I don't think we should use the word co-management, and I don't think we should use the word governance because those are complicated ways to say a much simpler thing. And people usually do not tell you if they don't understand technical language because they might feel a little embarrassed or they might think they understand it when they don't. This is one way a survey becomes imprecise because they're going to interpret that language differently than we will, or they're just going to pretend they know and answer inaccurately. So by controlling the language we use, we can control the precision and the accuracy. Long questions. I don't like long questions in surveys. I love them in focus groups sometimes, but not in surveys because people get fatigued, they get bored, they get confused, and they give up, and you don't get good responses. So I believe a survey question should be as few words as possible to ask what you want to ask. And I also believe that each word should be as few letters as possible, just to make it as simple and clear as possible and accessible as possible. Finally, ambiguity. So we have two examples here of ambiguous language. The first is, do you attend management meetings? Well, what fisheries management meetings, agricultural management meetings, other types? They may interpret management meetings differently than we did, and that ambiguity creates low precision. The second example is a different kind of ambiguity, and it's just confusing language. How often do you not report people for breaking the rules? That's a weird way to say that, and people are likely to get confused, and they might answer the opposite of how often you do report, and then your accuracy and precision is shot. So just say it in the most simple way and the clear way. Chris, I see a hand
Yes,
raised.
yes, Ben. Just one question. I see the language error, like long question, but does a long survey could affect the results?
Yes, great question. And we'll actually come back to that later, but we can say it now that research does show that longer surveys sacrifice data quality. And that's because, again, people get tired, they get bored, they stop paying attention, they just want to answer the question more quickly. Um, so yeah, it's a relatively consistent finding that longer surveys about the same subject do get worse data. And there is a trade-off you have to make there when you're deciding how to design your surveys. It's a great question and a great point. All right, the next kind of mistake is another one that I see all the time. It's really obvious once you know about it, but until you know about it, it's an easy mistake to make, which is compound questions. Compound questions is one question that has more than one question in it. So my rule is very simple, one question per question only. Here's an example. Have you witnessed overfishing and use of destructive gears in your MA? I know why you would want to ask it this way, because we want to get as much information as we can in as few questions as we can. But by putting two questions in one, we've sort of destroyed our question. Because if someone says no to this, what does it mean? Does it mean that they've witnessed overfishing but not destructive gears? Does it mean that they've witnessed destructive gears but not overfishing? Does it mean they've witnessed neither? Well, we don't know. So there's no precision in this question, and that means the question is basically uninterpretable. We just don't know what the answers are telling us when we see results to a question structured like this. We're better off just asking two questions. There are special cases where you may choose to ask a compound question because you know that for your purposes, it doesn't matter which of the two is happening. But that's an unusual case. Finally, we have response category errors. Missing options is one we've already talked about with the hair color question. If you don't give people a choice that applies to them, then they're going to have to answer with something that doesn't apply to them, and the results won't be accurate. Missing options includes other. We should usually, if not always, include other as an option. Forced answers. Now, this is an interesting one because sometimes forced answers are fine and sometimes they're not so great. Here's an example of a forced answer. It's a Likert scale question that has no neutral, right? So I'm forcing you to give me an opinion. That's not always a bad thing. It can be a good thing when the subject is familiar and when our goal is to elicit sentiments. So at the end of this session, I'll give you an assessment survey about this session. and I'll ask you, did you like the session? Did you learn from the session? And I'm going to force your answers. I'm not going to give you a neutral because you understand what I'm asking. You're familiar with the subject, which is this training. And what I want to know is when push comes to shove, what's your opinion? That's okay. When it doesn't work very well is a case like this, where you have a complex or ambivalent subject that people may have mixed feelings about. And you want to give them a neutral in that case, right? Scientists know more about the fishery in some ways, sometimes, but not in other ways, other times. So I don't know if I agree or disagree. If I saw this in a survey, I would just say, I don't like the question. So it's good to include a neutral in questions like that. And it's good to include an I don't know also, because neutral and I don't know are different. And if we don't have both, then we don't know what they mean by neutral. So that's something to think about. Finally, unbalanced scales. This is easy to avoid, but just so you're aware of it, a Likert scale needs to be balanced. This scale has 2 positives and 1 negative. And that's a way of forming a leading question, actually, because I'm making it statistically more likely that they will answer positively. So I'm kind of tipping the scales here, and that invalidates my data. We really can't do that. Okay, I see a couple questions have come up. Let's see. We have a project where one of the KPIs is a customer satisfaction rating. This refers to community satisfaction of the process and the design. I'm thinking that I can develop a survey and make sure that I design the consultation process and design to align with the survey questions and influence the rating. Yeah, I think that's great. I think you go back to that same process I described above. Figure out what exactly you want to know. How are you defining satisfaction? What is the process? What are the components of the process you want to know satisfaction of? And then that is the grounding to start designing your questions. Adrian, is it a good recommendation to divide a long survey into 2 or 3 different moments to apply them, like one part one day, the second part some days later? I have no experience doing that. I think it can be a viable option, as long as the survey isn't depending on the continuity factor. So it depends how the survey is designed, I think. But I think you can design a survey to intentionally be able to do that. And that could be a smart way to do it. Um, yeah, so it's a really interesting idea. Okay. I'm going to take just a few more minutes. We've got about 3 more slides left, and I think they're worth our time. Um, Here are just a few extra tips. These are really helpful for me when I think about surveys. The first, we've already talked about, but define what you want to know at the beginning. That's your domain. It's your topic, just like, we were talking about with Diane's example of customer satisfaction in the consultation process. Define that. Not only define that you want to know that, but define what those terms mean for your purposes. And then as soon as you've done that, you get to ask this question. Now that I know what I want to know, is a survey the right tool to find out, and why? Remember, surveys aren't good for everything. They're good for some things. They're good for pointing us in the right direction. They're good for what questions, how many questions, how much questions. If you can't answer this question, then a survey is probably not the right tool for what you want to learn about. And there may be other data collection methods that are better suited. Design each question with intent. What does that mean? To me, what that means is every single question has a purpose, and you can define and articulate that purpose. And the relationship between questions has a purpose. Maybe there are multiple questions that are in concert with each other, echoing each other so that you're validating your data. Maybe you think some answers will relate to other answers in correlation or as a driver, and you know you want to explore that. And that gets to my last point, which is create an analysis plan. We almost never do this when we design a survey, and we should always do it. It makes survey design better and it makes analysis better. And an analysis plan, we can do a whole other session on how to plan analysis of a survey and do analysis. But basically, an analysis plan has three components. How will each question be analyzed and interpreted? That's that intentional question prompt. Two is how will each question be calculated, which is different, right? How will you actually do the math? Will it be an average, a median, uh, a score across a Likert scale? Or in a Likert scale, you could do just the percent who have positive answers. So you have to think through, how will we actually calculate this? And then how will questions be combined or related to each other? You can use questions to validate each other. So we have what, like 4 questions on the household survey about food security. Those validate each other. That helps with precision and accuracy because if they're all pointing in the same direction, we can feel good that people are kind of understanding that question the way we intended. They're not the same question, but they're all connected and they validate each other. You can combine those into an index. That's another way to relate questions to each other. So we can take those 4 food security questions and have a food security index that combines them, and we can create correlations and drivers. So that's what an analysis plan does. And if you do that at the beginning, when you're designing the questions, it'll do 2 things for you. One, it'll actually help you design better questions because it'll show you as you walk through that analysis plan what your true intent is for the question. And then you'll redesign the question, recognizing that it's not quite meeting your goal. The other thing it'll do is it'll save you a lot of time and effort on the analysis side. Because once you get to analysis, you just have a bucket full of data, and if you have no plan, you're just going to start analyzing stuff willy-nilly. If you already have a plan, you know what you're going to do once you have the data and you can do it. You've already made the big decisions. Nothing's getting dropped, nothing's getting forgotten. A few extra tips. We've already talked about this. Strategic redundancy is a great strategy. If you have an important question that you're not 100% sure that you've gotten quite the right way to phrase that question, you can ask a different question later in the survey that is about the same topic, but is slightly different, and they can sort of validate each other. Do a question by question review. For every question, once you've designed your survey, look for compound questions, look for technical language, vague language, ambiguous language, check your response options. And then think about, is the question easy to answer? And is the question easy to ask? If not, you're not going to get good data. And as Christian mentioned, remember the trade-offs between depth and breadth of research in a survey and data quality. So we got to think about length in terms of those trade-offs. Amazingly, Andrea has put oh wait, I forgot one. Sorry. This is a tricky one, easy to forget, as I just showed. And I know I'm a little over time, so thank you for bearing with me. But we usually design surveys in Microsoft Word because it's really easy to type things. But that is not how enumerators and respondents see the survey when they actually do the survey. So we need to think about the tool they're using, whether it's Kobo, whether it's Google Forms or Qualtrics or SurveyMonkey or a different tool, that tool is the user interface. That's going to define the experience. It's going to define the format of your questions, which should influence what kinds of questions you use. Um, so really think about that when you're designing the questions. Don't just think about what it looks like on a Microsoft Word page. As I said, amazingly, Andrea has put all of this into one sheet that you can use as a cheat sheet anytime you're doing survey design. And the PDF is available. And you can see the link in the comments. So I have taken more of your time than I promised. And so this is now your time. If you choose to stay and ask questions, you are welcome to. I'm sticking around as long as you are. Um, we do have uh, a survey assessment or a session assessment survey. So we can put that link in the chat so that you can go and tell us how we did and what we can improve on. And also, really importantly, what you want to see after this. Um, Follow-up training options include survey analysis and analysis planning, other data collection methods, question design for focus groups and interviews and other. Chris, I see your hand raised.
Yes, uh, maybe I don't know, but could be interested to see like or measure the user experience before we do a survey or something like that. Because it's different, you know, when you are creating the survey versus when you are receiving or answering the questions on real time. So that could help a lot to see if the survey is it's actually collecting what we need or what do you want to know exactly.
I agree. I think survey testing is really important before survey launch. And you can do that through sample surveys with smaller groups. But if time and resources and staff allows, what I like is focus groups. Because then you can talk through the questions and people will tell you um, if the question makes sense to them, if the survey is too long, things like that. So I totally agree. I see here, and I see people are jumping off. So thank you for joining and even staying a little longer. I really appreciate your time and thoughtful comments and questions. I see a question here. Could the emotional state of a person surveyed affect the data collected? If yes, what could be a good recommendation? The answer is yes. The emotional state will affect the data collected. I mean, if I'm in a bad mood, I'm going to answer everything negatively. I just know that about myself, and I don't think I'm the only one. Um, it's hard to address in survey design other than making sure your questions are simple, clear, and not annoying. Because anyone in a bad mood is just going to get more annoyed with longer, complicated, confusing questions, or with response options that don't fit their reality or something like that. A lot of that issue comes down to enumerators and the interaction between enumerators and respondents, which is a facilitation skill, really. And so, what I would recommend is make survey design simple, prioritize simplicity and clarity, be precise, be accurate, and then really focus on facilitation skills. Um, Sort of institutionally, that's something we should do, and with our enumerators. Let's see, am I missing any other questions?
Diane is raising her hand.
Ah, yes, Diane.
Hi, Ben. This is very relevant because like we just had a meeting yesterday and we all said that we have to attend the social survey session because we're really about to design one for the project. We're wondering if there is opportunity for us to actually like consult with you or have you like help us design or even like in the analysis part. So is there any opportunity to get some support from your team as we like design the survey and even interpret the results?
There is every opportunity every single day. Please, I would be delighted. And we've done that time and again. We've been able to help out the Philippines hub team in the past with surveys. We've worked with IF on some of their surveys. The Mozambique team has done a governance survey. So we're always available. That's what we're here for. To help talk through the steps in the process, to help design questions, to provide feedback, all of the above.
Great, thank you.
And of course, I'll say, well, actually, I see a comment from Callisto that I do think is very important. The budget also affects the results of the surveys. That's so true. A lot of what I talked through today had to do with efficiency of resources. But if we don't have resources to enable it, it totally changes how the data is collected, how many people are collecting the data, how many people we can reach, um, and and it makes it very hard to collect good data. So we do need to budget for adequate surveying, um, even as we design for efficient surveys. And if there's nothing else, thank you so much for your time, for your extra time, and especially for your thought and questions and energy. Um, I really look forward to working on this stuff with all of you. And frankly, to just getting to see work that you all do without us on this. So thank you. Gracias.